Hello and welcome to The Understudy, the channel that teaches you everything about musical theater. My name is Philippa, and today I will read the last section from Broadway Musicals, The 101 Greatest Shows of All Time by Ken Bloom and Frank Vlasnik. To get the full version of the book, I recommend getting the physical copy, as images and certain inserts from the book won't be displayed here. I do not own this material. I'm just reading from a place of entertainment and education, and I will not edit these audio recordings as I go, so you will get the unabridged version. Today, I will read section Z, the last section. Ziegfeld Follies of 1919 opened June 16, 1919 at the New Amsterdam Theatre with 171 performances. Music and lyrics by Irving Berlin, additional music and lyrics by Gene Buck, Reynold Wolfe, Dave Stamper, Harry Tierney, and Joseph McCarthy. Ballet composed by Victor Herbert. Sketches by Dave Stamper, Gene Buck, Reynold Wolfe, and musical director Frank Darling. Orchestrations for Buck and Stamper songs by Stephen Jones. Produced by Florence Ziegfeld. Staged by Ned Wayburn. Scenery designed by Joseph Urban. Costumes designed by Lady Duff Gordon and Madame Francis. Cast: Marilyn Miller, Eddie Canton, Johnny Dooley, Ray Dooley, Van and Schenck, Bert Williams, John Steele, Delilah Alda, Eddie Dowling, the Fairbanks Twins, Jesse Reed, Phil Dwyer, George Lemaire. The Ziegfeld Follies was America's first musical revue, opening on July 8, 1907. That first edition was an immediate hit, and following a move to the Liberty Theater of 42nd Street, became the first Broadway show to run through the hot summer months. It was such a success that it led to several other series of reviews, including The Passing Shows, 1912, George White's Scandals, 1919, The Greenwich Village Follies, 1919, The Music Box Reviews, 1921, The Earl Carroll Vanities, 1923, and Artists and Models, 1923. But it was Florence Ziegfeld's Follies that enjoyed the longest life and the greatest reputation. Will Page, Ziegfeld's brilliant publicist, explained that the Follies were musical entertainment for tired businessmen, which should represent almost the possible limit of what could decently be done upon the stage. The same thing might have been said for other shows, from The Black Crook, 1866, through O Calcutta, 1969. The 1999 edition of Follies was among the best of the series and introduced the song that would become its theme, A Pretty Girl is Like a Melody. This 13th edition of the revue boasted a first-act finale minstrel show featuring Eddie Cantor and Bert Williams as Tambu and Bones, and Marilyn Miller as George Primrose, an early minstrel leader. The show's finale was a tribute to the Salvation Army and its contribution to World War I. Imaginative, sometimes surreal costumes were the rage in early reviews. In this edition, the showgirls were dressed as salad ingredients, as classical music, and as popular beverages such as bevo, lemonade, grape juice, sarsaparilla, and Coca-Cola. Lavish costumes and settings, not to mention the talent costs, made the budget soar, costing Ziegfeld and his investors over $100,000. Remember, this was 1919, and the top per ticket price was $3. Among the many hit songs that came out of this edition were You'd Be Surprised, You Cannot Make Your Shimmy Shake on Tea, Tulip Time, and My Baby's Arms. With many interpolations over the run, this edition of Follies ultimately included more than 30 songs. Marred by the actors' strike in 1919, the show was forced to close on August 12th, but reopened on September 10th. After the strike was settled with the actors' equity had been established as the legal bargaining agent for stage performers. The 1919 Follies was so well regarded and financially successful, Broadway was soon inundated with reviews from the likes of George White, Earl Carroll, and even composer Irving Berlin. Ziegfeld would produce another 10 editions before his death in 1932. Florence Ziegfeld. Florence Ziegfeld was the greatest, or at least the most flamboyant, of all early producers. He was a man of superlatives for whom the show was everything. Lousy at business, but excellent at raising money, he was often broke, and preferring to plow the fortunes he made into the highly speculative world of the theatrical producing. Ziegfeld's organization and methods, although not his financial practices, were the precursors to the famous Hollywood studio star system, and his great monument, the Ziegfeld Follies, has become a legend, while his competitors' shows are practically forgotten. Even without the Follies, Ziegfeld would have made his mark on Broadway history in his productions of the musical Sally, 1920, Kid Boots, 1923, Rio Rita, 1927, his masterwork Showboat, 1927, The Three Musketeers, 1928, Whoopee, 1928. Surprisingly, he co-produced No Cowards Bittersweet, 1921. Ziegfeld provided all of these musicals and other sumptuous physical productions. That was his hallmark. Fanny Brice. One of the most versatile and popular entertainers of the Broadway stage, Fanny Brice's range of characterization was incredible. Equally adept at slapstick, self-deprecating humor, and intensely emotional ballads, Brice got her start at Keeney's Theatre in Brooklyn, where she entered an amateur contest singing When You Know You're Not Forgotten by the Girl You Can't Forget. George M. Cohan cast her in one of his early shows, but soon fired her when she couldn't dance. Dancing lessons then brought her to the traveling burlesque company, and when the leading lady dropped out of an evening performance, Brice took over but was unable to play it straight. She was cast in the musical College Girls, having the smarts to get Irving Berlin to write a song for her, Sadie Salome, which made her a star. That led to 9 editions of the Ziegfeld Follies, 7 produced by Ziegfeld and 2 produced by the Schubert brothers. Her other musicals were unexceptional, though she introduced many fine songs, including My Man, Rose of Washington Square, Secondhand Rose, and I Found a $1 Million Baby in a 5 and 10 cent store. After leaving the theater, she made a few movies and starred on radio, usually portraying her most famous creation, Baby Snooks. Her life provided the material for the Broadway hit Funny Girl and its screen sequel, Funny Lady. Backstage, actress Anna Held, then Ziegfeld's wife, suggested that the showman could produce an American version of the French Follies Burgery. The Ziegfeld Follies were the first American revues. By the time Ziegfeld Follies of 1919 had closed, there were so many interpolations in the score that no less than 41 songs had been sung on the stage sometime during the run. Librettist lyricist Harry B. Smith suggested that Ziegfeld name the revue series after an old news column of Smith's, The Follies of the Day, but Ziegfeld, who was superstitious, wanted the name of the show to contain 13 letters. He settled on Follies of 1907. Ziegfeld added his name to the Follies for the first time in the 1911 edition. Some of the Follies girls who went on to greater fame included Irene Dunne, Peggy Hopkins Joyce, Mae Murray, Marion Davies, Justine Johnstone, Paulette Goddard, and Barbara Stanwyck. Ziegfeld's favorite words were glorification, femininity, and pulchritude. Jean Buck was the uncredited director of many of the Follies. Julian Mitchell, the famed director of many of the Follies, was the inspiration for a character Julian March in the film and musical 42nd Street. Only the real Julian Mitchell was deaf. Eddie Cantor. Possessing energy, a pop-eyed impish glee, and a desire to please at almost any cost, Eddie Cantor achieved stardom portraying weak men made strong by women, adversity, and intelligence. Growing up on the Lower East Side and dancing for money on the streets, his professional career started in blackface, playing variations on an enthusiastic, bouncy, sometimes effeminate rascal. His professional music theater debut was in the Philadelphia Company of Smiling Island in 1905, also appearing in a West Coast tour of Cannery Cottage. From there, it was on to the Ziegfeld Follies, when he became one of Florence Ziegfeld's favorites, though the producer admitted that Cantor's humor escaped him, as did that of most of the comedians he booked. Still, audiences warmed to Cantor, and that was good enough for Ziegfeld to feature him in 4 Follies and innumerable midnight frolics. Cantor also appeared in Make It Snappy, 1922, Kid Boots, 1923, also under Ziegfeld's auspices, and his most famous show, Whoopee, 1928. Ziegfeld brought his production of the latter to Hollywood, where it was filmed in early Technicolor with much of the original cast. Cantor stayed on the West Coast and made a number of very popular movies. Then moved into radio and television. His last Broadway performance performance was in Vernon Duke and John Latouche's Banjo Eyes in 1941. Among the many great songs he introduced are Dinah, Album Me Bound, If You Knew Susie, Making Whoopee, and We're Having a Baby. Joseph Urban. Joseph Urban was one of the most talented scenarists and architects at the early part of the 20th century, and his magnificent scenery for the Ziegfeld Follies was a model of the Art Nouveau style. Born in Vienna, Urban's influences were artists such as Gustav Klimt, Joseph Hoffmann, and Joseph Albrecht, known as the secession of their modern ideas. Coming to the United States in 1912, he worked as an art director of the Boston Opera, 2 years later heading to New York to work for Ziegfeld and the Metropolitan Opera, among with other notable clients. Urban's designs stripped away the Rococo excesses of the period, utilizing painterly and lighting effects with a simplicity of suggestion that was seldom seen in the theater up to that time. Where the usual settings of the period were naturalistic, Urban gave his imagination flight and came up with the fanciful motifs that utilized color in a new and exciting way. His architecture was equally famous and includes such landmarks as the New School for Social Research, the Palm Beach Estate Mar-a-Lago, and the Ziegfeld Theaters. Urban designed film settings for William Randolph Hearst's Cosmopolitan Pictures, book illustrations, notably a series of the fairies of Hans Christian Andersen, costume designs, and even color scheme for the 1933 Chicago World Fair. Urban designed over 500 sets for more than 168 productions, some of which he also directed. Zorba opened November 17th at the Imperial Theater. 305 performances. Produced by Harold Prince, produced in association with Ruth Mitchell, music by John Kander, lyrics by Fred Ebb, book by Joseph Stein, adapted from Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kazantzakis, musical director Harold Hastings, music orchestrated by Don Walker, dance arrangements by Dorothea Freitag, directed by Harold Prince, choreographed by Ronald Field, scenic design by Boris Aronson, costume design by Patricia Siprot, lighting design by Richard Pilbrow. Synopsis. Nico arrives in Piraeus to supervise the reopening of a mine and meets the force of life named Zorba. Nico falls in love with the village widow, and Madame Hortense yearns for Zorba. Despite the tragedy of a woman's death and the collapse of a village mine, Nico learns from Zorba how to value life and embrace it. Cast. Zorba, Herschel Bernardi. Madame Hortense, Maria Karnilova. The Widow, Carmen Alvarez. Nico, John Cunningham. Leader, Lorraine Sarabian. Constandi, Joseph Alfanza. Mimico, Al Dezio. Of the hundreds of writers, directors, and designers and performers in this compendium, it is Harold Prince who is associated with the most shows. His remarkable career as producer and director spans the second half of the 20th century. After a time as stage manager, he graduated to producer, then producer-director. In his first period, he produced a series of excellent entertainments, including Damn Yankees and The Pajama Game. With West Side Story, he began his second phase, the exploration of the concept musical. Although Cabaret is considered the best of these shows, many feel, and many disagree, that Zorba is the show that really put it all together, exploring a theme, life in this case, and all its permutations. The show opened with the cast seated in a half circle facing the audience. The leader, played brilliantly by Lorraine Zarabian, informs us that life is what you do while you're waiting to die. In later productions, the lyrics was changed to life is what you do till the moment you die. Zorba speaks of an old man planting an almond tree. He said, I live every moment as if I would die never. Think of that, boss. He lived as if he would never die. I live as if I would die in a minute. Zorba celebrates life in its entirety. The sound of a bozoiki, the sight of the flower, the smell of a woman, lost love, heartbreak, and death too. This is a rich, uncompromising musical. People live and die. and not always nicely. But through it all is the spirit of Zorba, the spirit of life. Just as in Cabaret, the central theme expressed in songs by the protagonist. Cabaret's Cliff asks, "Why should I wake up?" In Zorba, Nico asks, "Why can't I speak?" Zorba teaches us not to wait, because later might be too late. To speak now, to embrace life, and to live life to the fullest. Harold Prince, the most important figure in the musical theater in the second half of the 20th century. Harold Prince's work as a producer and director is unequaled. Having begun his career as a brash young upstart, he was fascinated with every aspect of the theater and yearned to somehow become involved in his great passion. He learned much from his mentors, director George Abbott and producing partner Robert E. Griffith, not only what makes the theater work, but more importantly, how to get the best results from your fellow artists by always treating them with honor and respect. A master at casting and a superior editor of texts, Prince also excels in creating thrilling stage pictures and environments. A pioneer in the development of the concept musical, his instincts for the theater is unsurpassed, and his shows often set against a larger canvas of societal and political conflict. He has worked with many of the seminal figures of the modern musical, including John Kander and Fred Ebb, 3 shows, Jerry Bach and Sheldon Harnick, 4 shows, and Richard Adler and Jerry Ross, 2 shows. His most important collaboration, however, has been with Stephen Sondheim on a series of truly historic revolutionary productions including Company, A Little Light Music, Pacific Overtures, Sweeney Todd, and The Brilliant Follies. Following his collaborations with Sondheim and the worldwide success of Evita, Prince had a streak wherein he seemed unable to produce a hit, only to roar back with one of the most successful shows in Broadway history, The Phantom of the Opera, continuing a collaboration with Andrew Lloyd Webber. Bounce, his recent reteaming with Sondheim after a 20-year hiatus, remains a question mark for Broadway, but his fierce intelligence and talent are disputable. Maria Karnilova. Maria Karnilova started out as a ballerina in the American Ballet Theater, and after befriending fellow dancer Jerome Robbins, she segued into musical theater with a featured dance role in the post-war Call Me Mr., where she met husband of over 50 years, the delightful character actor George S. Irving. After discovering that she could talk as well as dance, she began to play speaking roles, breaking through as dressy tessitura in Gypsy. Her comic timing, range, and European look led to globetrotter delightful roles. As an Italian signora leading the novelty dance The Kangaroo is Bravo Giovanni, as the Russian Jew Golde in Fiddler on the Roof, and in her most touching performance as the French prostitute French former prostitute Hortense in Zorba. She went into retirement after the stage version of Gigi in God's Favorite, coming out only to play the Kay Medford role in ill-fated sequel Bring Back Birdie, and the Queen, opposite her beloved husband, in the New York Opera production of Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein's Cinderella. Backstage, Lorraine Sarabian was originally the understudy for the leader. During previews, the original leader missed the first act, running late from a wedding, and Sarabian went on. She did so well that the original actress never played the part again. Lila Kedrova played Fräulein Schneider in the Harold Prince production of Cabaret in London, but when it came to casting Madame Hortense, Prince didn't choose to cast Kedrova, who had played the part in the movie and would eventually win a Tony, playing the role on the stage in the Anthony Quinn revival.